Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Revival of America podcast. This is Jenny. I'm the owner and the host of the Revival of America. Today we have SG and Anon in the house, everybody. So please, if you guys have a question for SG, feel free to raise your hand over here on Telegram. And I will unmute your mic, and at some point you can ask SG your question, or on Telegram. And hello, Rumble and X over there, X Live. If you guys have questions for SG, please feel free to write your questions in the comment area if you cannot speak over here too on Telegram. Also, to everybody, please be careful who you listen to, who you follow, what you're putting in your mind. It is, oh my gosh, it's getting more wild by the day. These chat rooms, comment boxes, podcasts, whatever it is, it's getting crazy, guys. Having a lot of, seeing a lot of people, just the infighting is there, everybody. It's crazy how everybody's kind of going at each other's throats, and we're seeing these people, these fakesters, whatever you want to call them, trolls, agitators, getting called out left and right, falling to the wayside. So everybody, just please be careful who you listen to, who you follow. I say that for a reason, because we're going to continue to see it. But you got to tighten it down, because the confusion is real. I get it, I understand it. Many of you reach out to me asking me, you're telling me you just don't know who to listen to, who to follow. Just first and foremost, listen to God, follow God. And if you just don't know, you guys, follow Donald Trump over on True Social, because he is telling us, guys, he's calling for the arrest of Obama. He's talking about the 2020 election, saying, he's reposting things that people are putting out there. Like 2020 is not over yet. All the fraud that's happened. He is getting in front of a lot of this stuff out there that we have seen and been told about, from the sleeper cells to Iran to Venezuela to just all this chaos, the alien invasion. He's neutralizing a lot of this stuff, getting in front of it, everybody. So maybe it won't be. Who knows? I do believe that there's going to be some kind of a scare event happening. What that looks like, I don't know. But, I do believe that Donald Trump, and I say all the time, he's ahead of everybody 1,000 steps. And you have to believe that they're trying to neutralize a lot of this stuff, because, it's been said many times, they don't want to see a lot of blood in the streets. So you have to keep it somewhat kind of to a little bit of normality, so people don't freak out and go do just that, blood in the streets. So please, everybody, key thing is really who you follow and what you're putting into your mind, because we are in a fifth generational war, the mind war, and this definitely is a boot camp for our mind. I do believe that we are being tested. We know we're being listened to, but I do believe that they're trying to test the waters of we the people, to see where we are and how we are going to respond to certain things as they start coming out. I mean, look at Mark Taylor over there regarding the mortgage fraud and Act Blue. This is going to explode, and I do believe this is where too it could get to a lot of people in that gut punch, right? Because what is that? It's financial, right? You have the school bonds that Juan Savin talks about all the time. That thing is going to blow up when people find out that their money that they've been given to their children's schools, it doesn't go for what they say it goes to. It goes in their pockets, guys. And what we are about to see with Kash Patel talking about, the arrests are coming, they're coming. They're already starting to happen, guys. We're seeing them little by little, but I think it's going to be a flood of them come right up before the 4th of July and on through the rest of the year and into 2027. I mean, there's just so many arrests that are going to happen, guys. I mean, remember those indictments, each one of those 500,000 plus indictments that are out there, each one of them contains up to 99 people. So that's a lot of people. So it's going to get local. And I've said it for a long time, everybody. It's going to go from the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, from your superintendents at the school to your next door neighbor, if he's a lawyer, doctor, or whatever. If they've partaken in any part of this nefariousness, and it's this global enterprise, evil enterprise, everybody, they are going to go down. So this mortgage fraud, these school bond fraud things that's about to pop off, that's really going to get to a lot of people. So everybody just stay vigilant, head on a swivel. That, with all of that, that I just talked about and things that we're seeing, and with this hantavirus, it's another tactic, guys. These guys are going down. Now, everything that they're trying to put out there on us, from the alien invasion to, all these ICE raids that, Trump is getting Tom Homan out there and making that happen. No border crossings. There's more positive than there is negative happening. But just know, guys, Trump is stopping these people at the doorstep. So they're gonna go for this scare event, and that's the hantavirus, I do believe. So scare event, or another type of thing, not necessarily scare event, but lock us down type deal, or fear mongering, that kind of thing. The best thing I can tell you on that one is do not comply, because we're going to have those people out there that are going to comply, right? They're going to go put the mask on, they're going to do the social distancing, 6 feet apart, all that stuff. Just don't comply, because that's how we cut the head off at the snake. We know it's all BS, but just pay attention, everybody. We're in the thick of it, and but there's more positive, and that's what we need to focus on, positive, than there is negative. Don't not listen to the news and the current events that are happening, because then you're gonna see what's being said out there, right? But definitely follow Donald Trump, you guys, and because he really is telling us without telling us. And yes, don't comply. Do not comply. If they want to come out and try to say, "Oh, you gotta lock down, you gotta go get another, jab or whatever," nope, nope, and nope. So please, everybody, be careful who you listen to, who you follow, and what you're putting in your mind, again, because it's a thing. Also, if you get a random message from me guys, saying I'm pretending to be me, know that I will not randomly reach out to you and ask you if you're ready for a scare event, any financials, any crypto, anything like that. Please know it's not me, not any of my guests. They won't do that either. Block and report them. Let me know so I can make sure they're not here in my channels. Uh, and then we are being listened to in over 100 countries, guys. I counted it 2 weekends ago, and it was right at 150. So we're making a lot of great positive noise. What you're wanting to look for when people ask me how do we know who to follow again, right? Consistency in the guests' messages, consistency in the host messages. You don't want the flip floppers. You don't want the "I love Trump, now I don't like Trump," flipping the side of the fence, right? Or the never Trumpers, all of a sudden Trumpers. It's getting pretty obvious to kind of make that decision of who not to follow. It's really in our faces, and I do believe we're going to see a lot of these accounts start going away because they're going to be found out. And we're seeing a lot of it over on X. We're seeing it on Telegram. We're seeing it on Facebook. It's happening, everybody. I mean, I have removed probably over 8,000 people just from my channel here. So it's not about the followers for me, guys, because if it was, I wouldn't be removing people. But I'm seeing people come in and out of my room here and in other places, and just red flags to me. So I'm removing them because I want to protect you guys, my members, as well as myself, my channel, and of course, my guests that come in here as well, because these scams, these fraudsters are getting very creative by the day with their scams. So please be careful, guys. Also, too, if you want to listen to the replay on the podcast host or the social medias, those are iHeartRadio, Spotify, Anchor, Apple, Google, Breaker, Pocket Cast, Riverside, Podbean, Amazon Music. Social medias are Jenny Jeread Facebook, at Jenny_Jeread X, at JJeread Rumble, at JJeread True Social, at JJeread Instagram, The Revival of America right here on Telegram, and The Revival of America over on YouTube. And then last, well, a couple more things, guys, because SG's here. He's on a time frame today, guys. So again, when we ask him his questions, just be mindful of his time that he has. Email me, everybody, at therevivalofamerica@yahoo.com. If you have a question for me, want to get in touch with John Baxter and his staff at Anti-Aging Medbed, have questions about Field or Field's books, again, therevivalofamerica@yahoo.com. Submissions for your stories, your journeys, and you want to get your voice heard on a platform, TROA submissions@yahoo.com. I do vet them because of the trolls, the scammers. So I do vet your story. You give me a synopsis of your story. I read through it. If I believe it's real, I will reach out to you via email. We'll get your voice, your story here on the show. Because remember, everybody, it's your your story and your voice that are going to help change this new world that we're coming into. Real quickly, also too, Field McConnell, I do not have any news on him as of today. No news is good news. Just keep prayers up for Field McConnell, as well as Derek Johnson's father. Please keep your prayers up for his dad. He was in critical condition a couple days ago in ICU, but now he is in critical but stable condition. So those prayers are working, everybody. So keep them up, everybody, because they do work. We are witnessing God's hand work in real time. So with that, everybody, I want to welcome my good friend SG Anon, and obviously I know you guys love SG. He's here once a month. I would love to get him on more often, but I know he is a busy guy behind the scenes. So how are you, my friend?
Doing well. Thank you for having me back, Jenny. It's good to be here.
Oh, always SG. Mi casa su casa. My house is your house. So I was just telling the audience, obviously, be careful who they listen to and who they follow, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff, a lot of positive things going on. And I would love to have you talk a little bit, and I know you're on a time constraint, so we'll have you talk a little bit about, some of the things we're seeing going on in the world right now, and then we can go to questions. But I do believe, I always tell the audience, Donald Trump is always 1,000 steps ahead of these people. Maybe not 1,000, but he's a lot of steps ahead of these people, right? And I do believe that he is neutralizing a lot of these concerns that many of us have had, such as the alien invasion, the sleeper cells. Now we've got this hantavirus coming out, kind of like a COVID 2.0, right? So I would love for you to touch on that. Obviously, we did see that Donald Trump landed safely in China. Just talk to us about what you think about all that and what you see is going on here in the world as well.
Well, I think that's an interesting summation of things, right? The entire landscape that we have right now is presenting all of us dual realities. I think a lot of patriots out there are having a hard time sometimes, Jenny, reconciling this dual reality landscape. How can I be for something or affirmatively behind something that seems to be causing certainly difficulty in the domestic landscape, but quite a bit of consternation and contention out in the international landscape? How can I be behind something that looks like it's, doing this thing or that thing, and perhaps, that's a condition that we have to worry about being more than just temporary, but it's also taking care of this other condition that's been a long-term standing condition, such as the Federal Reserve, for example. It's causing the degradation of that, the erosion of that long-standing problem that we all want to be rid of. So it's sort of a landscape of having to be of two minds in some regards, and that was entirely the purpose, I think, for the Q drops coming out when they did, at this point almost 10 years ago, because such a period of time was going to transpire that humanity really needed an early learning curve and plenty of time to come along to some of these concepts, because on its face, on its surface, it looks very difficult to find where one stands, because again, you have these competing interests and these competing desires that have to take precedence at some point collectively and civilizationally over another. And I think that's the sifting and sorting process that we're all living through and seeing right now. With respect to the geopolitics of it, and that gets into the nitty gritty of what we're talking about, sifting and sorting these transformations across society. There's a lot of different ways that we could slice that pie, and it seems like we're getting another iron in that campfire almost every day now. We have conversations happening between France and Germany about armament deals. We have conversations happening between France and the United States about this so-called hantavirus situation, which to me looks like a Luciferian spell work ritual because of the neuropredictive programming that was seeded out into the consciousness space well in advance of this thing making its appearance for us in its present day and in its present form. I've seen clips of the X-Files all the way back to the late 1990s discussing this concept of the government being involved in a very shadowy sort of secret administrative state or national security state sort of way with respect to something like hantavirus. We've got the current meeting right now between President Xi and President Trump. We've got the announcement from North Korea that they have augmented their first strike doctrine, and they've augmented their nuclear doctrine with respect to assassination of the supreme leader, the premier of the country there in Pyongyang. That's clearly a strengthening posture, preparing for something. We know that Moscow has been amassing a lot of troops, and I've been talking about this, Jenny, for over 8 weeks now. There's just a huge troop buildup happening in the southwestern area of Russia along the Bryansk state border with Ukraine. There's still this problematic NATO incursion, which is being fueled on the ground through a great deal of mercenary feeding funnels, if you will, from all over the world, but specifically a lot of it coming from Africa and South America, that are making that entire situation, very difficult for the Russians to continue to put up with. And President Trump has been talking to us in recent days about, I think the Ukraine war may be coming to a conclusion. I don't think that he's referring to the conclusion being a very peaceful conclusion where Zelensky and Putin sit around the table and make nice with each other. I think he may be pointing us in the direction of a serious escalation on behalf of Moscow to try and clamp down on that conflict and get it resolved so that it doesn't continue to be a bleeding funnel. All of this is happening against the backdrop of this Iran conflict going on in the Strait of Hormuz right now, and in the greater Persian Gulf, Gulf of Oman area. That conflict, Jenny, has a lot more angles to it than just the basic nuclear weapon component. As a matter of fact, I would even go so far as to say that to some degree, perhaps President Trump does believe what he's saying about that. He doubles down on it a great deal, and perhaps he has intelligence, access to that intelligence that none of us have. We should weigh that in mind. But I don't believe that the nuclear weapons component is even the majority of the reason why we're over there. I believe that the main reasons are to permanently restructure and sort of destabilize and restructure in that order the centrality of the worldwide flow of oil and energy markets and petroleum-based derivatives, because they're so integral to everything that goes on, from microplastics all the way over to your basic amenities of life, to medications, to lubricants for military technology, and et cetera. And that system has to be reoriented away from Rockefeller and Rothschild, and we're seeing that happening literally in real time. It's not a fun process to live through, but it is happening. The other component that sort of spins off of that is what it does to the the Federal Reserve dollar, the Federal Reserve note, in the eyes of the rest of the world, and the desirability of treasury bonds. And if one looks at this through a sort of an irregular warfare lens and appreciates that the opponent is not the regime in Tehran, and the opponent really isn't even Moscow or Beijing, but rather it is the central banking mafia that has been in control of all of Europe and most of the developed world for a very long time, and their control structures and their fortifications and their hills to be had and their armament situations and their posts, etc. I could keep on with the metaphors here, the referencing. But when we appreciate that those are the real targets of what's happening right now with Iran, what's happening with Ukraine, what's soon to happen with Taiwan, what has been going on in Africa for 3 years now, what has been going on in South America in a much more elevated way since January, but began under the Biden administration, it becomes a lot more clear as to why we're in the situation we're in the Persian Gulf. On top of that, and something that my research has been pointing me to pretty recently that I'm breaking today with your audience for the first time, is that there's a great deal of what I believe to be human trafficking interdiction operations happening through coordinated efforts, believe it or not, between the United States Navy and the Iranian Navy, separate from the IRGC. And it's worth highlighting that there are distinct components of the Iranian military who are patriots, who are interested in cooperating with the rest of the world and removing the sycophants that have been in control for a long time. And there's components of the Iranian military that have sort of integrated themselves so heavily with IRGC that they're now indistinguishable. And you have those factions that are working against one another, obviously for control of the nation state and control of the nation state's assets and territories. But one of those factions, in my opinion, has been in coordination with the United States Navy to seize certain shipping vessels belonging to corporations that have deep ties to human trafficking, to known human trafficking funnels or entities. For example, and this is just one example of 4 or 5 that I've been able to find in the last 3 weeks. A few days back, actually, it's a couple of weeks ago now, the Iranian a detachment from the Iranian Navy running on equipment and speedboats that didn't look to be Iranian made from the footage. But I could be wrong on that because I'm not a military expert. But either way, it didn't look like their standard speedboats. They were rushing this tanking ship, which was flying under a Greek flag, I believe, or it was flying under a Malian flag. I forget which one. I believe it was a Malian flag with a Greek owner. The name of the ship was Epimondes, I believe the name was the first name, and the last one was Monrovia. And it was flying under the ownership of a Greek corporation called Technomar Shipping, Technomarr Shipping, Inc. That Technomar Shipping Group has been around for quite a long time. They're based primarily in Greece. They have ports of call all over the world. They have a lot of interagency and intercorporate partnership and leasing arrangements with their vessels for other groups. But one of their favorite customers, Jenny, is Evergreen Marine. And so when you look at what's happening right now in the Persian Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, and this ship and at least one other ship also belonging to Technomar Shipping have both been stopped either through this blockade by the United States Navy or outright disabled and seized by the Iranian Navy, it tells me that there's more going on here. There's probably much more to the story than meets the eye, and would also explain why we have paratroopers specifically being deployed to that area of the world. Because if you need to shock and awe a marine vessel on the open water or within inside of the shoreline, and you need to capture it rapidly, coming in with helicopters is extremely loud, and it gives a pretty good tip off that hostages, or it gives enough of a tip off for any sort of traffickers or facilitators of criminal activity to kill off any hostages that you may be seeking to try and reclaim. But if you airdrop from altitude, they will never hear you coming. And so looking at what we've got going on right now in that area of the world, and then we've got this meeting with President Trump and President Xi happening today, which President Trump told us was going to be, or today in the coming days, and President Trump told us it was going to cover a great deal of trade and assessment. It was going to talk a little bit about the component happening around the world with respect to finance. He refused to comment specifically if he was going to talk to President Xi about Iran. I'd be surprised if Tehran and the Iranian conflict does not come up. But all of that tying into the current timetable, it looks to me like we may be preparing for coordination, enforcement, if you will, or coordinated drill activities having a double meaning, if you will, across the entirety of the South China Sea and the Strait of Malacca, based on conversations that have already been had between spokespeople from the PLA and spokespeople from the Pentagon. So Jenny, this is just a really exciting time to be alive. But it's difficult sometimes to see the forest for all of the trees. And now we're in a period of time where the trees are getting up and growing their own legs and walking around.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with you on that one, 100%. Real quickly, we're talking about China and then Iran. Did I read somewhere? Did maybe on True Social, Donald Trump, did he send over a nuclear submarine to the Middle East? Have you seen anything about that?
A nuke was spotted outside the port of Gibraltar, headed into the Mediterranean. So its final destination obviously is anybody's guess, but I think there's only a couple of places strategically to me that makes sense, and that would be either around, out from the mouth of the Red Sea into the Gulf of Oman, near Yemen, Qatar, Oman, etc. In that area, either there or the Strait of Hormuz, or the very far eastern component of the Mediterranean off the coast of Israel. Outside of areas like the Suez Canal, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense that you would want to park a submarine in the canal right now. Outside of that, it wouldn't make a great deal of sense to me. And it's difficult, I think, sometimes as we watch these military assets and movements traversing along, and for the first time in history, we finally have a landscape where leaks in the sieve are being plugged with respect to publication of what's actually happening with military operations, exercises, assets, components, etc. From the media and various news sources. I think we have to sort of be careful about how far we draw those conclusions until we have a little bit more evidence. We could have a sub, not that it would make much sense to me to do this, but we could have a sub going, traversing the Mediterranean Sea down through the Suez Canal and headed out towards the Indian Ocean, maybe to make a stop over at Diego Garcia before heading on through the Strait of Malacca. These are, I mean, it wouldn't make a great deal of sense from where it's at, presently, but these are possibilities when we analyze those situations right now.
Thank you, SG. And then my last question real quickly. So everybody here on Telegram, if you have a question for SG, please feel free to raise your hand. I will unmute your mic. Over here on X and Rumble, write your comments in the comment area and I will read your question to SG. We are streaming live through those two places as well, SG, just so you know. Regarding China, we know he's over there having talks. I was also hearing that it was just he and she that were going to have private meetings, and she's daughter, because that's the only one he would trust to translate. Do you know anything about that? I mean, can you maybe speak on that at all?
Well, I haven't seen that exact blurb, but if that is true and we have a translator close to President Xi who is familial because President Xi doesn't feel that others are trustworthy. I think that tells us that we are at a critical juncture here, and it would make a lot of sense when you consider China's behavior, both militarily but also economically, on a number of different fronts over the last 90 days to 100, probably 180 days ago or so. You know, they had been increasing their drills throughout the South China Sea area, the contested area around the Strait of Taiwan. They have been buzzing the island pretty heavily, entering what's called the ADIZ, which is the Air Defense Identification Zone around Taiwan. They've been sending more and more aircraft into that, especially in the last 90 days, than really the entire 12 months prior. The situation with Iran has created, I think, a bit of a pressure vessel situation inside of China with respect to their military aspirations for the entirety of the region. And so you may have a very pragmatic Chinese approach come of that. Maybe it goes something along the lines, and this is just speculation of, on my part, but it could go something along the lines of, we don't have enough really to militarily dominate most of what used to be French Indochina. So why don't we just worry about reclaiming Taiwan, because that's a heritage issue for us. That's an ancestral issue for them, and they're not going to let that go. Looking at this landscape that's happening with respect to the National Bank of China and their activities over the last 14 days or so, they've imported numbers finally closed for the entirety of the first quarter. They closed just a few days ago. They imported more than 680 tons of raw silver just in the month of March alone, raw silver bullion and ore. And that represents, 630 tons. And that represents the largest singular importation on behalf of a nation state for silver in since record keeping began. So moving into that aspect, one has to ask, well, why would that be? Well, it's clearly, to revitalize the industrial base and hedge against what is going to be a loss of what I believe to be diesel fueled power and energy generation there inside mainland China. I think you're seeing the transformation to, a mineral and an asset that they can depend upon both from a currency standpoint, but also from an industrial and pragmatic use standpoint happening in real time. And with President Trump meeting with President Xi about trade, about securing that, dynamic of what we'll call bilateral friendship between DC and Beijing, there's a lot of aspects I think that have to be on the table with that. What goes on with Taiwan is certainly going to be important to the Chinese side, and the U.S. enabling some of that is going to be, I think, a point of stress that'll have to be tested. And we have to keep in mind that even though President Xi and President Trump and President Putin, in the auspice of the Q drops, are aligned entities on their main missions, you still have, self-interested heads of state who want the best for their country and want to be first. Everybody wants to be number one. And so as we go through this process, I think it's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of this in the immediate days after the meeting with respect to agreements about, tariffs with going back and forth between the two nations, and with respect to China's security guarantees for the United States in the Pacific, and the United States energy security guarantees for China, if those come up at the meeting, and I'd be surprised if they don't.
Thank you, SG. All right, everybody. I don't see any hands. Come on, guys. You guys, we're here for you, but I'll ask you questions until we get some hands. But okay, so let's touch a little bit on your thoughts, SG, about. Let's talk about the UFO files that were, that they were releasing them. Do you want to touch on that a little bit? Because a lot of people out there kind of flip it to their narrative, what fits their narrative, right? So do you want to touch on that? And then we can touch a little bit on the hantavirus.
Well, sure. I think the UFO component and the disclosure of it, again, and I hate to keep using the phrase "of two minds," but that's really how I am about a lot of this, Jenny. I think that it gets the ball rolling for us on the aspect of disclosure of extraterrestrial or non-human but still sentient life forms. And we know that that exists. We have biblical record of that. Angels and demons, right? These are entities that people saw. In many cases, they interacted with them. They had full-on, experiences with them that were of a palpable nature to some degree. And it's not just in the Holy Bible that's recorded. It's recorded in a lot of scriptural texts across the entirety of what is now mainland Asia. So looking at that entire topic as a holistic umbrella topic, the fact that we're moving in that direction at all is proof positive, in my opinion, that we do have humanity-focused or humanity-interested forces that are working on our behalf to some degree across various different portions of the U.S. government and U.S. bureaucratic apparatus. And we shouldn't discount how important the bureaucratic apparatus is to both the functionality of the government and the military. We're talking about the secret program compartments that happen inside of these bureaucracies. We're talking about the funneling of information in days past, where it would end up compartmentalized away into nothingness, sort of like the never-ending staircase puzzle. Excuse me. Now we have something that seems to have a dead end stop. There seems to be an end point, right? An endpoint user. The forks in the road are much less, and we've got a lot of declass that has happened. In fact, so much so that the CIA was just caught today attempting to shield more than 40 boxes of materials from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to prevent the ODNI from being able to declassify those records. And those records just happen to pertain to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. So the panic in that component, in those bureaucratic shadow state cubicles, if you will, that still stand against us, it's very real. I mean, it's a tangible panic. At the same time, when we look at something as delicate as the disclosure of what the U.S. government and U.S. military has been aware of with respect to non-humanoid sentient life and interactions with whatever those life forms or beings are, we hear the preference that non terrestrial beings or other sentient beings are sort of preferential terminology from whistleblowers. But when we look at something that delicate, I think we need to be careful about the first tranche and the second tranche and begin cross-comparing things as they come out. The Pentagon straight out told us that it would be a cascade process where they would release files periodically and to check back on the website. It's likely that we will not see many press releases going forward about new updates. And I think the onus is on us to check back and look at that website and see what they have and see how consistent it is with material that they have already released or whistleblower testimony that we feel we can trust in the Congress of the United States, such as that of David Grutch, for example. And there are, I think there's a few credible others. Some are sensationalists, but I think we have had some credible witnesses talking about these types of issues. Congressmember Chet has been saying for a number of months now that there's an alien base under the Atlantic Ocean somewhere, not terribly far from the coast, from the territorial waters of the United States. And this is something that he feels is a national security issue. And that's based on the testimony that he's received and interactions that he's had, both public and private. So as we look at this disclosure aspect on the UFOs, again, I think we have to step back and be of two minds. On the one hand, it's incredible that we're even having this discussion. If the opponents of humanity were truly in control of all of the major important levers still at this stage in the game, I think that we can rule categorically that instead of UFO disclosure, we would get a nuclear war. So the fact that we're getting this and not the countervailing point to that, I think is promising. But it remains to be seen how promising. And so as we look at the research that they release and the materials that they have, we have to be, I think, very diligent in making sure that things are consistent with narratives that they've already established. And if they're not, that there's an official explanation for why that is. Maybe you've got a careless employee who fat fingers some keys or forgets to put in a certain paragraph somewhere. These types of things do happen, or an AI that's running it at this point in the game and maybe isn't so great at composition. But over time, we'll have a very good idea, I think, of what is true and what is not. And as this disclosure continues to escalate in the weeks and months ahead, I think that's going to spur new whistleblowers from the space, perhaps even, and not from space, I'm talking about from the space, the UFO secret space program, secret energy projects, spaces within inside the government. Maybe individuals who have worked in them before and are no longer under certain NDAs, or maybe those that are willing to come out anonymously and say, no, these types of things are accurate, or these types of things aren't accurate, and here's why.
Thank you, SG. And then, with the beings that, we've been taught, these aliens, right? The green men, big black eyes, all crazy head. There's a lot of speculation out there what these interdimensional beings are, if you could call them that, I guess. Are what are they? Is it go back to the blood type? Is it the incestual individuals that have been family to family? Like what what is, in your opinion, and granted, everybody, nobody can really tell because nobody really knows, right? In your opinion, what is your thoughts on what these beings could potentially be? I mean, we know they walk amongst us, the shapeshifters, the reptilians. What are we looking at here, in your opinion?
Well, I think trying to answer that question, that's such a brilliant question, Jenny. I love coming on with you all and hearing these types of questions because it spurs the truly important conversations that we're not yet having at societal scale, but I think that will come pretty expeditiously because we've watched as Anons and really awake patriots out there, we've watched over these last several years as very taboo things or things that you would think are never going to make a public appearance suddenly that they have. With respect to what we're dealing with, I want to disclaim this first. I'm not a military expert and I'm not a subject matter expert on this topic, but I love to read, and I've read since I was a kid, and I've read Tom Clancy since I was in 5th grade, and and things of that ilk, various sci-fi series, political thrillers, suspense thrillers, John Grisham, etc., that kind of stuff. And so looking at this particular issue and understanding how the government usually behaves about it and why the government would have such an issue with certain components of science and of the scientific and faith communities. And so when we talk about faith communities, we're talking about the scriptures, we're talking about the older societies that go back, quite a long ways, the Orthodox Church, for example, Coptic Christianity out of Egypt, the early, Gnostic Christians from the pre-500 AD, 600 AD period. We have that. All of that is included within the government's disdain for, that particular subsect of society, and we've seen that sort of played out through the immorality or the removal of morality, like the affirmative removal, the reversal of morality out of that particular space. At the same time, the ostracization of really advanced, independent scientists who had projects that, showed a lot of promise. And that's covers the entire spectrum from, astronomy to energy to propulsion to understanding of physics and things like that. The ostracization of some of them and the elevation of others over the last 40 to 50 years or so, really since the 1960s in a big way, but certainly since the Nixon administration. We've seen this deliberate effort to silence certain members of the scientific and academic community and the R&D community, for that matter, from the defense industrial base, but elevate others. And I'm giving you a long basis for the reason that I'm coming back with the answer I am, because I want the holistic context to be apparent. I don't consider this topic exclusively in the lens of science or faith. I consider it as both. I consider it as akin to meeting another version of us operating on some form of a different system. If I have several different computers on a table, for example, I can have one computer that's made by Dell and it runs this operating system, and I can have another computer that's made by HP and it runs that operating system, and I can have a Mac, which is completely different and runs an entirely different system, in and of its own right down to the root source coding and how that entire system is created and interwoven together. And yet they are all computers and they all emit light and they're all capable to some degree of input and output. And they're all, again, to some degree capable of tantalizing our sensory systems. So looking at that and appreciating it in that lens, I would say that we have the angels and the demons of old. I would say that we have the non-terrestrials in the tribal myths from sub-Saharan Africa of old, to include very large beings, giant beings. I believe that we have that we're dealing with, potentially even the bloodline of the ancient oversized Canaanites that were talked about in the book of Genesis, relatively extensively, and in later books as well. And I think that there's other things too from different spiritual and scientific schools out there that help to inform us what the overall lens is here. My concept for all of it, and I guess that's really the essence of the question here, is that if you have a light bulb, you have several different light bulbs together, you can turn the frequency of those bulbs up or down. the frequency that they emit, the intensity of it. You can attune the frequency, but you can also attune the intensity. And you can adjust the photons that come out of that bulb, the light that you consciously interact with and interpret coming off of that bulb. And you can have, many different light bulbs of varying intensities and brightnesses and varying wavelengths and spectrums, and they will all light a room to some degree or another. Some light less of a room, some light more of a room. Some don't like the sunlight. Some work really well, for outdoor lighting. Apologies. But fundamentally, they are all light bulbs, and they all have a very similar baseline operating mechanism that ties them together as light bulbs. And if we look at human beings in that same vein, we are all frequency emitters. That's literally what we are. We are photon receivers and emitters. We are essentially transmission posts and receptive posts for the photons of this reality medium that was created for us here in this world by the Holy Spirit of the living God. And we are attuned to perfectly live here in this dimension. This dimension meshes perfectly with how we are made, right? We are from dust we are made, from dust we will return. There's a reason that that's a cliche, right? When we look at how man was made, it's said to us in many separate books that the earth was involved in that compositional process. And so we have a dimensional quality that is perfect for where we are at. But our dimensional qualities may not be perfect for where someone else is from. For example, if you have a being whose photon composition is lesser, meaning not as intense and perhaps at a lower vibrational wavelength, a lower resonant wavelength than that of humanity, they would be very at home in a more low wavelength environment. So that would include lower light wave spectrums, lower acoustic spectrums. It would include lower chemical spectrums, things that are resonant together at again, that different frequency gradient. And I'm not a scientific expert, but this is my understanding of it. This is how I approach this topic. At the same point, if we have, beings that naturally oscillate at their, most basic quanta level, we're talking about the constructs of the DNA chains that make up the being itself. If that basis of existence is vibrating at a much higher level than what we as human beings in our dimensional earthly existence are having, coming off of the core of who we are and what we are truly made of, then those beings would appear to us as light. They would appear to us as, I could see the description angelic being perfectly appropriate. And in both instances, you would have a situation where in this situation, our one-to-one equal of a different frequency would not be able to sustain and subsist in this dimension, in our reality, for very long without augmentation. And so when I look at everything through that lens, it sort of marries the spiritual and the scientific. It sort of explains both. And it explains why we would have all of these different vast experiences, why we would have all of these differences of interpretation and variation in description and capability and hostility or not hostility, benevolence or not benevolence, and touching all different groups of people, from the tribes of South America to the Siberians in northern Russia to, urban individuals in downtown LA. It really does, I think, fundamentally alter this entire UFO, alien, non-terrestrial being, other sentient being topic, subject matter. I think this entire area fundamentally alters our perception, or stands to alter anyway, our perception of reality. And it makes a great deal of sense why we would have the U.S. government, specifically through the vice president, calling for, more spiritual interaction between, the America, at least domestically here in the United States, between Americans, because I think that we need to be really rooted and grounded in our faith in the creation, and our faith in the Holy Spirit, and our faith of, who and what God truly is. And maybe it's time for us to take some of our blinders off.
Amen. Wow, great response there, SG. I always love it when you come on because you give such great answers. All right, we've got a couple questions here real quickly. I am going to point out to everybody, if you guys haven't been paying attention to Donald Trump's trip to China, Notice who he took with him, and I would love real quickly your thoughts on that, SG, regarding the guests that Donald Trump took with him to China, such as Tim Cook, Elon Musk, a bunch of the CEOs of these banks. I would love your thoughts, and then we'll go to Freebird. Go ahead, SG.
Well, I had not seen some of that. I knew about Tim Cook. I knew about Elon Musk. I wasn't aware of the banking ones. I was aware of Jensen Huang from
So it's
Nvidia.
so here it's Goldman Sachs, Tesla, and Nvidia, Apple, BlackRock, Boeing, Goldman Sachs, Citigroup, GE, Micron, Blackstone, Cargill, Jensen Huang. I can't say that word, but it's a plethora of very questionable people.
It's fascinating that the entourage includes these particular forces because these are the same forces that have been quietly working with very divisive and very seditious components of the Chinese private sector and the Chinese military industrial complex. China has a bureaucracy. It's very similar to the United States when it comes to their defense industrial base and their overall military economy and military commercial complex that exists there. And so these companies, all of the companies that you just named, they have demonstrated ties either through supply chain, financial arrangements, strategic partnerships, joint venture programs, on and on and on. I could give you 4 or 5 other, headline examples for these types of programs, these types of interactions that go on. But all of those companies are heavily involved in what's happening on the ground in China and are no doubt have done interactivity and probably business deals with components that President Xi would not appreciate operating within the country because the Chinese economy has been so captured by the Swiss banking cabal for a very long time. There hasn't really been anything for a central figurehead of power anyone who preceded Xi. There hasn't been anything that they could really do about that because the infiltration and the leverage was so enormous and so huge. It's fascinating that entourage should be accompanying President Trump at this stage in the game. And again, the timing I don't think could be any better with respect to what we saw happen in California with the Oakland mayor resigning, but not only resigning, but resigning and then disclosing that she was a Chinese intelligence asset. One has to ask, why would anyone disclose that component of their life in a resignation? Would it not have been enough to say, I can't do this anymore. I don't like this anymore. I believe what this was getting ahead of the curve, knowing that something was going to come of the exchange of information that's now happening between President Trump and President Xi. And it's very likely, especially with so many of the tech company CEOs accompanying President Trump there, it's very likely that you're going to see some information shared on Chinese plants inside the U.S. technology sector.
I agree with you 100%, and I totally forgot about that Chinese spy that just recently got busted. So yeah, thank you for that. All right, go ahead, Freebird. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, Freebird.
Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Go ahead, Freebird. Push the blue button.
I'm trying. Yeah, I'm pushing it. Can you hear me
There
now?
you are.
There you are.
Do you leave? Do you leave it? You have to push it and hold it.
No, you just push it once, it'll stay open, and then when you're done, you push it again, and it will mute your mic.
Okay. Weirdly, when I pull my thumb off, it turns blue again.
Oh, you may
I'll
have
just
to
hold it.
go.
I'll
You
hold
may
it.
have to go out and come back in. You may be having some connection issues.
Okay, let me just try by holding it. If you can still hear me, I'll just keep an eye on it. But
Okay.
I want to say thank you so much, Jenny and SG. I've been following you for years, and with all of the floodgates of disclosure that's coming out right now, I feel really sorry for people that haven't kept up with this narrative because it is just overwhelming. And you've both been such a vital role in revealing things. So thank you for that. My
Oh, thank you.
question, SG, is on timing of revelations. It seems curious to me that NASA just did a launch of Artemis 2 on this supposed lunar uh, circling, and then you have the UFO disclosures coming right after it. Everything about that NASA launch seemed fake to me. That's my perspective. I know everybody has a different opinion. But just wondering if you can touch on that, just thoughts on the timing of that and what maybe you think about the whole NASA excursion.
I think that's a great question, and I love the jovialness of it too, because it really hints at this. It discusses a serious topic, of course, Revelation and the transpiration of events that happens, in that book of the Bible. But at the same time, it heralds this incredible age of peace and prosperity and love and wonder and expansion on behalf of humanity. So I appreciate the question. With respect to Artemis, I'm of the exact same opinion. I think it was all staged. I think it was done in a Hollywood basement somewhere. I think it was extremely well done in some ways, and in other ways was purposefully poorly done. The feedback on the video footage, the graininess of the footage, the quality of the footage seemed highly suspicious to me, especially when we have footage that has now been declassified from CIA surveillance technology in the late 1990s, aerial platforms that were cruising anywhere from 35 to 55,000 feet. And you could literally read the road signs on this surveillance footage from that altitude. So we know that the technology for better footage exists. We know that the feedback on the audio, at least on my end, seemed extremely grainy, almost purposefully distorted in a way, like it had been run through a low intensity scrambler of some kind. The green screen showing in one of the frames when they were doing one of their moon passes, and they were supposed to be moving through, into the dark side of the moon, so to speak, and watching the Earth disappear. And you could actually see it was a flash, in the moment, and it was the lower right-hand quadrant of the moon shot that was going through the frame. You could actually see what appeared to be some sort of trolley or something on the ground, and then it, immediately blipped back. It was very fast, but it was noticeable there. And then a whole host of other issues too bring this entire thing into question. So then one has to ask, well, what was the point of all of it? Well, I think the point of it, if I may be so bold, is to sort of run a similar spell work that has been run in ages past with a different outcome. And so I've been asked this question a few times: why are we doing things a certain way with respect to, the progression of the awakening? Why aren't we just dumping more information online? Why aren't we turning it over more to the people to, adjust and absorb for themselves? I'm a fan of that approach as well. I would take that approach if I were in charge. But with respect to how things are being done right now, I can also appreciate almost like the metronomic quality that it's being done at. It's this very rhythmic, symbolic, almost energetic, a pulsation, I think is a good way to describe it, of moving humanity through these major realizations and major leaps in consciousness. And I think one of those leaps has to be that, while the concept of the space domain may not be a terrestrial planar Earth, and while it may not be a hollow Earth, or it may not be even a globular Earth, we don't really fully understand because of just the amazing layers of psyops on this issue. But while we may not understand that component of the equation, we do know that they have been faking all of this stuff for over a half century now, and we have to ask why. What is actually being hidden there? Is the moon traversable or is it not? Is the moon much closer to us or much farther away than what we're being told it is? What is the nature of all of that? And that's going to lead us, I think, directly into the biblical texts and other spiritual texts too. Texts that referenced positions in the stars throughout the book of Job, positions in the stars that have been referenced in books like the Ramayana and the Zohar, tribal texts that were used by the Incas, and the Maya for doing certain things at different points throughout the year because of where the stars were at and where they may have come from. Why are there multiple African tribes that worship the star Sirius B as though it is their actual home world? I mean, they pay homage to it literally once a month, every month. One of these tribes does, and there's a feast once a year where they dress up as this sort of humanoid, but not really humanoid figures, and elevate themselves in stature, a number of feet with footwear. So we have to ask, what is all of that about? And I think the Artemis mission ties back to that as well. I think it's preparing us to have a different discussion about what's actually happening with the moon, what's actually happening with all of this talk of Mars, and what's really going to come of the celestial symbolism. The celestial energies is really a better expression of it for our own awakening as we go forward throughout the end of this decade and all through the 2030s.
Thank
That's
you,
awesome.
SG.
Thank you.
Thank you, Freebird. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I could talk for hours about this, but I love that. I mean, it's kind of mind blowing when you start looking at all of it. But thank you so much. Yes.
Thank you so much for being here and listening. Thank you. All right, go ahead, Michelle. Your mic is unmuted. Go ahead, Michelle. Your mic is unmuted. Okay, go ahead. Increaser Joe, your mic is unmuted. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, SG. I am so honored to be talking to you. You are the voice of reason, and even your voice,
The honor is mine.
your makeup, honestly, your voice speaks to America in a way they can understand it and grasp some of this psyop. So, recently I heard again David Straight talking about 2 years. Let's see, it was 24, I think. He was talking about that we still have to go through 7 years of trials. Um, can you speak to that? I'm wondering, you know, for so long, some of us thought, oh, we're going to wake up, disclosure, and that next year we're going to have the time of our lives, but we still have things to go through. So can you speak to that a little bit, and maybe not the timing of things, but where we can keep our interests and our thoughts? Thank you.
I'd be happy to. I'm not familiar with Mr. Straight's work in that regard, and so I don't want to opine on that as the basis for my answer to your question. But I think I want to answer the question in a little bit of a different way. Rather than looking at it as a dedicated period of time or trial with trials or not trials, I want to take score of where we're at post 2020 and sort of examine the pace of that. And then maybe we can do a little bit of hypothesizing going forward. This would be all speculation on my part, but I think it paints a good picture. So we had the events of 2020 that we did. We know that that sort of was the ignition point for the grand majority of, we'll say, culturally interested patriots across the entirety of the Western world, and really most of the world too, but certainly across the Western world. That was their ignition point where they woke up. They realized something is dreadfully wrong. Nothing about any of this makes any sense, and began looking into why things were happening the way they were. And that has propelled, that connected a lot of people, I think, to the Q drops. It also connected a lot of people to just the general rhetoric from President Trump, from Moscow, from certain, capital cities around the world. What are they saying? What are they doing? And what are their biggest corporations doing? And so that led us through the 4 years of the Manchurian Biden administration. We had the last year of Trump there. He's continued to tell us, even as recently as just a few months ago, that it's his favorite chart. He loves his favorite chart, and that chart happened to show him, the one that was on the ground in Butler in July of 2024 happened to show him leaving office in April of 2020, not in January of 2021. So we had that 4 year period of the Manchurian administration, and we saw during that administration people coming around to the idea of pedophilia being in control of the government, of certain medical countermeasures and medical companies that are associated with medical countermeasures not being interested in health and wellness, but really only being interested in money. The corporate capture of the US government really began to set in hard for people during that period of time. The extremely suspicious nature of natural disasters and their highly focalized occurrences, where they were occurring relative to what was actually on the ground there, and how a lot of that tied over into pre-existing government documents that desired those lands. People began to realize that that was also connected to this, broader control system that exists. And so now, fasting forward to today, we've gone through the election season of 2023, 2024, the first year of President Trump in 2025, and we've really hit the accelerator a lot. We've gotten now into the mainstream discussion about Epstein. We've gotten into the mainstream discussion about it was more than just sexual abuse. It was torture and, in some cases, termination of trafficked individuals by Epstein and his networks. We've gotten into the industrialization of abuse of minors through the disclosures from the government of the UK, and that's exemplary of a lot of different governments across the West. Unfortunately, we've gotten into the free energy discussion, I think, pretty deeply post 2022, all the way up to the present day, and President Trump talking about a quantum leap in the American standard of living. a great deal of money being put aside in the last 3 years for the study of artificial intelligence, the study of quantum capable internet, such as QuanNet out of New York, all of these different things. And now in the present day and time, we're coming into the, I think, realization that we're not alone in the universe, and that there is a bona fide shadow state structure. There's a joint and hand style structure that exists in the background of our governments all across the world that really is leveraging a great deal of the activity and pulling the strings. And that structure ties into that corporate capture, which I think people have been waking up to in earnest since about 2022, 2023. So having said all of that, that's quite a distance to cover in 6 years, to go from an unassuming American citizen who's just living their life, working, enjoying their family time, barbecuing on the weekends, paying their taxes, to go from that type of existence to the entire world is out to get us, and it's been that way for 3,000 years. That's a huge distance to run, and yet we've run most of that distance already just in the last 6 years. President Trump continues to remind us in the last 24 months, and as recently as just a few weeks ago, that President Obama, former President Obama, will face military justice, not civilian justice, military justice for what was done to the American people under his administration, what was done to the rest of the world under his administration. That's a really big deal. And so that represents, I think, in a lot of ways, what remains with this awakening process. The election component, I think, factors into that in a big way. Most people now are aware that there's malfeasance in the elections, but I don't think the majority are yet aware that President Trump should have won the 2020 election. I think you've got, I say not the majority, but I would estimate it at 60 to 70% of the population is now aware that that is the case. But the other 30%, maybe 35%, is not fully there yet. And so they have to be brought along through the actual mechanisms of accountability, investigation, justice, etc. And we're entering into those phases, at least according to the president's own rhetoric, as very, very soon, I think, because we've seen discussion about that from his Truth Social just in the last 15 days. And that doesn't even include the unpublished investigations and unpublished grand jury proceedings that we know are ongoing that have been referenced several times by court reporters, by spokespeople from the Office of the DNI, etc. This is a really long answer to your question. I apologize for waxing a little bit, but the basis of the question is so huge.
Wax away.
Well, I appreciate that. The basis of the question is so vast because we're sort of saying, well, how much longer until we get there? How much longer until we can say, okay, we've taken a really big hill on this awakening journey and now we're propelling ourselves forward? I can't see it taking really much longer than this current Trump presidency, because how else does one hold a former POTUS accountable under a military commission if one is out of office, right? Even as I say that, I'm hesitant to use the reflection of that, because ultimately it does have to be the office of the JAG Corps of the United States military that makes that decision. But if you don't have control of the commander-in-chief and the office of the presidency at the time that occurs, or at the time that is supposed to occur, it very well could not happen. So I'm looking at the next 18 to 24 months as really, really pivotal in this journey. And I'm looking really at 2030, probably 2029, 2030, somewhere in that period, for us to start seeing really dramatic international accountability for COVID-19.
Thank you, SG. Thank you, Increaser. Okay, SG, I know you're on a time constraint. I've got you. Can you take 2 more questions?
I could probably do one more.
Okay, so here's one off a telegram from Hot Pants Nance. SG, what will happen to the colleges and universities involved with the COVID pandemic, like North Carolina and Duke Biolabs? Will these schools still exist in the future? Thank you.
Well, it's almost difficult to say. I think that the implication with what actually happens to the school entity itself overall may be more dependent on how the general public responds to these schools being outed for what they actually did and what they actually participated with. I think the better focus of that component of the question would be the individualized departments who did the research, who partook, those who drank the poison juice, right? Those who took the apple and poisoned it and then sent it along its way. I think those are the individuals that are very likely to go away, or the departments that are very likely to go away. the entirety of the academic landscape is not wholly to blame for everything that went on with COVID-19, but there's a lot of it that really ties together. You've got several schools of prestige that tie back to the philanthropic interests that made all of that possible, that planned all of that, that coordinated all of that across private society over the last really 20 to 25 years at this point, with it coming into 2026 now. Looking back to 2001, we know that that was, around about the time that Anthony Fauci got involved with all of that. So with bearing that in mind, I think that any institution that willfully participated in accepting money for the construction of a biological pathogen from the United States government is probably going to find themselves in the crosshairs of the U.S. code that deals with Geneva and the participation in the proliferation of biological terrorism activities, or the creation, funding, et cetera, thereof. But I don't think that that's going to be. I think that whether the entire school closes or whether the school just ends up completely transformed, or all of the staff cleaned out and new staff brought in, I think that remains to be seen on how those investigations actually go. In other words, you might have the head of a department at a school solicit a grant for this particular project and receive that project, but not notify their superiors or their colleagues, not notify the administration of the school. Or you might have the administration of the school quietly planning to participate in some of these projects, outside of the decision of some of these department heads or some of the staff heads. And those staff heads may simply be issued a project and told, you can either do it or we'll just find another staff head, or department head. And I think in those situations, it's going to have to be who knew what, when did they know it. It's a sticky wicket kind of issue with COVID, because COVID is the ultimate expression of irregular and unconventional warfare. It is the manifestation of all different arenas of our society: financial, corporate, academic, political, law enforcement, court, judicial, all of that stuff, right? It's the culmination of all of it sort of dovetailing together in a captured operation in a lockstep way. And to handle that requires a really largesse judicial effort. And ultimately, just like I was answering the question a moment ago, ultimately, I think the COVID situation lands itself in international tribunal territory, but the enforcement of that against domestic academic institutions will likely be at the discretion of the American people and whoever is in control of the American government at the time that those proceedings actually get underway.
Thank you, SG. And everybody here, SG typically gives us 90 minutes, but he has to go pick up his little guy. So obviously family is always first when it comes to me and my guests. And of course, all you guys, I hope family is first as well. So SG is typically with me once a month. So SG, we will see you in a month or sooner.
Sounds fantastic. Thank you for
All right.
having me back, Jenny.
Oh, of course, we have a great weekend, and we'll get in touch with each other on the backside of it, and kind of maybe if it works out for you. We're talking about everybody having SG come on, like kind of like we do with Derek Johnson. Derek Johnson's with us every other Monday at 6:30 Central Standard Time. We're gonna try to get something like that if it works for SG's schedule, to where you guys will know he's on the third Wednesday of every month or whatever it may be, right? Same time, same place type deal. So we'll keep you posted on that, but just know right now SG is with us once a month, and I will see him in a month. And for all of you here that want to come back here on Telegram, for my next two shows with John Baxter from Anti-Aging MedBed, he will be on at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time, and then we're going to have Rick Anson over here again on Telegram, streaming them both live, everybody, through Rumble and X live over there. We will have both of those gentlemen on 4:30 for John, and then Rick Anson with not anti-aging, but ageless peptides, as well as Brain IQ Health. He'll be on here at I believe it's 1:30, 2:30. He's 3 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, so that will be 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So with that, everybody, God bless you, SG, and we'll talk to you soon. Take care, everybody.
God bless all.